all, I was reading through all the information I was able to get about you, Nikita. And if it would be some kind of public event, I was planning to say like Nikitою Lalvani, novelist, which was born in Kota, Rajasthan in central India and was raised in Cardiff, Wales, having tons of prizes, starting with Men's Booker Prize, or saying that you're the novelist, which books were translated into tons of languages, or 16 languages. I had two ways to say that. Or to mention that you're currently promoting your novel, which was published in 2020, You People, but I don't like all these labels and stamps. And while everybody's announcing you, everybody's using this word as India-born, Cardiff-raised novelist. And we're always trying to put the labels on everything and everybody around us. Do you need this label to announce yourself and to explain who are you? So how your identity influence on what are you doing and what are you talking about?
Oh, it's such an interesting question. I think that you're right, and that there's a real sort of intensity about the reporting of novelists, and that there's a desire to get those identity markers up and to put them around the writer in order to maybe understand how to read it or how to understand the interview. It's like a sort of shorthand or a heads up. Personally, I'm in agreement with you. I don't feel like the fact that I grew up in India and, well, the fact that I was born in India and raised in Cardiff, it's not irrelevant. It's obviously relevant to my lens on the world and the things that I'm interested in. So I don't know, I'm interested in sort of multicultural society in London, in You People. And it's possible that the fact that I'm not from London influenced that or affected how I portrayed the characters in the book. But that could go for any one of a million people. So I kind of think you're right in that it's almost like the fact that I was born in India would give me some authenticity, or does it point to the idea that I am able to tell those stories? I'm allowed to tell the stories of someone who's Indian, or as in You People, Sri Lankan. Whereas actually, when writing You People, I battled with all the same things that anyone who wants to portray a restaurant that has people from Spain in it, from Georgia. I still had all of those anxieties and research-based questions that anybody who wants to write about cultures other than their own would have, you know? So I think I was born in India. I came to the UK when I was a 1-year-old, but I can speak Hindi and I am interested in India, and India does have often something to do with the inflection of what I'm writing, but it's a small part of the whole mosaic, probably.
Oh, thank you for this answer. I'll ask you a little bit later. I'll ask you more about all this Indian background, but more connected to the books you're writing. But first of all, even your Cardiff background isn't influencing you so much because your English is not pretty Welsh. Mostly, yeah. I don't understand what people are talking, and you're having pretty different accents. But like talking about your identity, what should I or our viewers or our readers know about yourself? Like can you describe a few pictures of your reality which characterizes you really? So which parts of your identity should be interesting and well known by ourselves to make are closer to you and to understanding your books?
Well, basically, I am interested usually in all of the books in a moral question that doesn't have a direct answer. So they're all three books are about morality. And so I guess that would be an element that characterizes the books. It's definitely the interrogation that I'm interested in. So what's right and what's wrong? In a godless universe, you know, where you don't have a moral arbiter to tell you what's right or wrong. that we're just human beings going along trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And often in each book, when I'm trying to write the book, I'm trying to figure out that moral compass myself for a big question that's come up. That's usually the start for me of writing a book. Do I think that the characters or the story, which is usually starts from life, so that's, I guess, another identity element as an author, that I like stories that I've seen in life, and then I tend to manipulate them and play with them and reversion them and try to use them for this ethical search to understand what would one do in that situation. So I used to be a documentary maker before I became a novelist, and I still use the same, I guess, techniques, which are, I use a lot of oral interviews. I do a lot of interviewing. I kind of watch and listen a lot. I'm a bit kind of nosy. I'm a bit intrusive. I think the same skills are at play, but I've got a lot more freedom as a novelist because I want to change reality in a sense in order to explore the question.
I had a lot of questions. Now I have even more questions. So let's start with you people. Guardian is describing the narrative of this book as You People is a story of London pizzeria, which is staffed by undocumented immigrants. So you're in this book, you're trying to describe the reality of refugees' daily life. And one of the main characters is a refugee from Sri Lanka. So why you choose this topic? So why was it so this refugee teen was so close to you?
Well, I used to know a restaurant that was a little bit like the restaurant in the book, like Vesuvio in the novel. And it was a safe haven for people who were lonely or who couldn't make their lives work. You could go to this restaurant for help. And I found it really to be this fascinating place. I knew someone who was a bit like Thule in the book, who's a kind of Godfather-style character who decides whether or not he will help you and at what cost. You know, what would your interest rate be if he lends you money? Will he offer you legal aid? Will he offer you the ability to reunite with your family if you've been separated from your family due to any kind of circumstance? What does he think in this playing God role is worth supporting? And it was a melting pot, this restaurant. And it was around the time where a lot of people were leaving Sri Lanka due to the war and had been separated from their partners and their children and were trying to find them. And so that to me felt like a story that is very relevant now, even though it's set at the turn of the century, you know, around 2002, 2003. This idea that there could be a place in a city like London where people from so many different backgrounds rub up against each other and fall into each other's lives and make decisions about whether or not that person gets to see their family. That felt to me like a very contemporary and current story, you know? And sometimes when you write fiction, well, for me anyway, going to a period that's at least 10 years ago, if not more, gives you a little bit of distance and the ability to think about it. So I thought for a while, should I set it now? And then I thought, well, this refugee situation that happened in the UK back then is so relevant now that with some distance of 15 years or so, maybe I can do something with it.
The interesting thing, which connects all of your books, is how you're choosing the stage in which everything's happening. So this melting pot, as you said, or I know, playground. This description is quite more understandable for me. So you choose this Vesuvio pizzeria in London for you people, or you choose this village in the novel called The Village. So why is it your author's method to choose this pretty closed and quite understandable and concrete scene in which everything's happening? So why are you closing this?
You've isolated something that is probably very true about my process, that I like to have the pressure cooker I like it to gradually build, and I like that to be located in place. So place is this sort of locus of circumstance, and the past, the present, the future, all of it is there in one. If it's all there in this microcosm of place, I tend to like that. That's true. So in Gifted, my first novel, the place that starts to boil is the domestic place. It's the family home. And as things start to go wrong for the maths prodigy in the book, she's gifted at maths and is supposed to be a high achiever because she's an immigrant child. The family starts to melt inside the house. And she manages to leave that sort of pressure cooker to go to Oxford University. But I do like this idea that of being confined. So in The Village, which you just already mentioned, the place is a prison where everyone has killed someone, and people are seemingly free to leave and they're free to go and come as they please. It looks like they're free because it's an open prison, even though everyone has killed someone. But the documentary crew that come in to film them start to become embroiled and sucked into and trapped by themselves and their own sort of consciousness. And that idea of the boundaries, the physical boundaries of a place, and the kind of, I guess, existential boundaries of the place in the book, that's definitely of interest to me. It allows you to create tension, you know, it allows you to slowly build something that's linked to do with facing things because you can't escape. You know, you face things or you find solace in these sort of, if you think of, as you call it, the stage has a boundary.
And mostly when somebody's describing his book, he's having this main character, which is standing against the whole world. But in your books, this whole world is not the world, it's kind of small community, pretty concrete community of people. And is it a part of this stage thing? In the villages, the workers, all these refugees, and not only refugees in this, which are working in these restaurants and restaurants nearby. And the village is this prison in which everybody has killed someone, and this documentary crew. So what is the role of the community in your books?
Yeah, again, the community linked to, they link to place. So I guess in both books, there's a slice of life that, for me, I want it to be very variegated, striated, you know, full of different aspects of class, different aspects of racial identity, and different identity markers that all kind of fall together and are put, as you've said. On the stage, you know, it's important that every character has something to do. That's the only thing. When you have a cast of characters, everyone, you can't put a character on stage and sort of make them very enigmatic and give them nothing to do. So you're right, I often have several leads in the book. I don't just have one lead character. They may take the stage for different lengths of time, but the story, I'm interested in point of view quite a lot. So I'm interested in you people. You've got a central character who's very enigmatic. He seems like a sort of Robin Hood character who takes from the rich to help the poor. And yet the chapters alternate. So you've got Nia, then you've got Sean, then Nia, then Sean, then Nia, then Sean. And they both are fascinated with the central character. But they both see him in completely different ways. They bring themselves to that storytelling. So when Nia talks about Julie, he seems like a different person than when Sean talks about him. And that interests me, the point of view that a character can bring to a situation based on their background, how they can see the same place, the same restaurant, the same people, and it sounds sometimes completely different because of their needs, their wants, and their hopes, their dreams, and their desires, I guess. Talking
about the points of view, can I find your point of view in this book? So what's your role as the author in it? It's more, this question is, I think, more about the village, because in the village, the main character in this book, we can find it, is a documentary which knows Hindu and is going to India to explain what's happening in this village. So it's pretty close, and we can imagine yourself while we're reading that.
So with the village, that's true. But both with Gifted and the Village, I think I started with the me cipher as a kind of beginning point. So I did go to that, I went to that village, the real version where it's set. It's modeled on a real life prison community where everyone has killed someone in Rajasthan. And in my first job, I was a bumbling documentary maker who wasn't very good at using the camera. And I was, in my mid-20s, and I went there and I was trying my best to speak Hindi, get it in focus, get the audio right, and to somehow be an ethical filmmaker. And it felt very much like, a little bit like Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now for me, that idea of the colonial film crew going in, except, going in and documenting a village. Except that I wasn't sort of straightforwardly British because I have got this Indian heritage and because I can speak Hindi. So I was both the translator, I was both in and out of the village at the same time. And that's how books start for me, where I've had a personal experience, like going to the restaurant a lot, that's in New People, and I can't fully understand it. I don't fully understand what I think about it. And in the writing of the book, the me character changes quite a lot because the things that I give her to do on stage are different from the things that happened in real life in order to create fiction. So by presenting her with different action elements that have a sort of dilemma about them, I probably learned something about myself, about the place. Ray in the Village doesn't come out too well. I mean, I'm quite hard on that earlier version of myself. So she doesn't come out so kind of squeaky clean in the book. She makes a lot of bad decisions and then tries to make them better. But she's, I guess, just somebody trying their best in the world to figure it out and to grow up. On one level, it's in all three books, there's also a coming of age element, where there is a character who needs to grow up in some way. And through the events in the book, she grows up to some extent.
In all of your books, you're having this element of, I don't like this word, but I'll use it, exotic things. So something which is not quite close and understandable for British or Ukrainian readers. How difficult is to work with such a topics? You're putting the Sri Lankan war, which is not pretty well known all over the world, and you're shown the main character, one of the main characters of You People is a Tamil. Why are you choosing to explain and to put this authentic and not pretty well-known elements into your books? Why are you trying to explain such and specific topics there?
Yeah, it comes back to the fact that I might be interested in something that I've encountered. I mean, the Sri Lankan war, the outpouring of refugees into the UK was huge. There's a huge population of Sri Lankan people who've settled back then and who've made a life, and there were safe places in the UK that you could go to that were hidden and that were known only to those who were fleeing. And all of that mystery and kind of suspense appeals to me as a writer. So it's normally that I'll snag on something. I don't go to it because I think I want to make a portrait of the Sri Lankan war. I'll go to it for novelistic reasons. The idea of going to a hidden place, of being in hiding, of being separated and wanting to find someone, these are very strong pulls for a reader and for a writer. But the idea of being separated from your family is something that's so current. And, even as the book was being finished, it was happening at the Mexican border, that parents and children were being separated. It's not something that's going away. Family reunion is the most kind of relevant topic that, I've come across since the book came out, even though the nationalities are different from the people in the book. It's an eternal question. The book also, it asks, you know, should you lie if government is failing you? When should you lie? When should you break the law? When is that acceptable? And we're living in times around, you know, migrating populations where that question is also very important. Should we just walk on by if someone is in trouble, or should we open our doors? Should we let our homes temporarily be safe havens? And so I encountered, I normally write about things that I've encountered, you know, a while back. So they sort of bubble up for a good few years in my head, and then they come out. And so there is an exotic element, probably because I'm interested in that culture, and I'm interested in trying to understand it in its very visceral sense, the touching, the feeling, the tastes, the dialogue, and most importantly, the emotions that arise. So I would always hope that the characters that I'm creating, they transcend that and become interesting to people who are not from that background because of the trials and tribulations that they go through.
Mostly while writers are telling such a stories and choosing such a topics, they are talking from the activist position and having some activist goal. As I know, as I read, once you donated your prize money to the human rights charity, and as Guardians say, you're always choosing the topics of the global importance. But from which position are you telling the stories? From the position of the activist or from the position of the researcher?
Well, it's very important. I think if you're a novelist, and fiction is the place that is most exciting for me in terms of creativity. If you try and be too activist, the book is unreadable. You know, you can't write a book that is purely in order to make your point. I think that the book has to live and breathe and show a gradation of opinion. I like to show left and right, if I can, in a book, rather than, even though it's clear that I'm leaning to one side, I don't think the world functions like that. I don't want to preach to the converted, you know, somebody who already thinks the way that I do. And as I've already said, when I'm writing the book, I'm trying to find out what I think sometimes in that gray area between extreme positions, extreme left and extreme right. So I think activism is important, but I don't think that a novel can work if it's completely bending to the symbolic. It can't, the characters in there have to breathe, they have to be with a dirty morality, you know, sometimes they do something well, sometimes they do it bad. You can't, you know, what it was important to me that, say, in You People, just because Sean is an immigrant who's gone through trauma, his father was killed in the Sri Lankan war and tortured, that doesn't mean that he is some kind of saint. You know, he performs morally dubious acts just like we all do. He's unfaithful to his wife. He's just trying to get through his loneliness. I would like the reader, and I do want to do that in the journalism around the book. And I want, for me, the book is successful if it makes you question your established modes of thought, the things that you think. If you end up questioning them or walking in other people's shoes. In London at the moment and in the UK generally, there's a lot of talk about marginalised workers during COVID and how vulnerable people who work in restaurants are, people who are homeless, people who drive taxis. Everyone who's on the border of what's an acceptable wage, an acceptable income, is vulnerable. And so if a book like You People makes you think about people who are taking home cash payments for earnings and how vulnerable they are, if it just makes you think about that life for a bit, then I kind of think the activism is done on some level.
Yeah, so it is pretty close to my position. Well, activists are telling something about the victims. Victims are mostly safe, but how are you choosing this? How are you describing this dark side of the refugees' life in the You People novel? Can you describe some of these moments?
Yeah. Well, the main thing about the restaurant is that from hanging out there, and when in the real restaurant where I used to hang out, that's in the book, what you realize is that refugees who are working and living in that sort of situation, if anything goes wrong, so if somebody gets ill, or if someone loses their job, or if anything doesn't work on that day or that week, then the hole that you can fall into is very deep and very dark. So it was that sense of a very immediate existence. You know, I want to get through today. I don't want to be thrown out of the flat because I couldn't pay my rent this week. I want to make some more steps towards seeking asylum and to becoming legal, and what that idea of being legal is, and being able to hold your head up high. But the position of everyone in the restaurant is that they go to the restaurant because they all need something. And the Thule figure is a character who decides, you know, he's got a pot of money and of legal aid. You know, he can give them a lawyer, he can give them money, he can try and help with even people smuggling. Some of what he does is legal, some of what he does is illegal. And in the restaurant, what you realize is they need an alternative system of governance. And what happens when that goes wrong? That's what the book is about. So if someone suddenly says, yes, I can pay for somebody to smuggle your wife over and your child, what happens if that goes wrong? What happens if they fall into the hands of people who are dangerous? And I like the idea of the suspense and the kind of propulsive nature of trying to follow that very real life situation. It's a gamble, it's a roulette, trying to find somebody that you've lost. What are you prepared to do? At one point, Sean, the character who we've already discussed, he doesn't believe that he's safe, so he goes and buys a knife in a kitchen shop, just a kitchen knife. And it's also that idea that the refugees in the book are living under a sense of threat. He doesn't know how to use the knife, and it's to his downfall. He has no idea. He's a geologist working in a restaurant. He doesn't know what he's doing. But the sense of threat, the sense that everything could end tomorrow, that's the kind of overriding, I guess, dramatic engine of the book, you know, living on the edge in that way.
Are you asking yourself how your book can change something in this global reality?
Well, I think when I start writing a book, and at the end of the book, at the beginning of writing the book and at the end of writing the book, I think about that. But during the writing, I try not to think about it too much, because if I think about it too much while I'm writing it, then it's like I've tied my hands behind my back and I can't write. So when I start writing, I'm thinking, what am I interested in and what can it do? I do think that fiction is political. Even if it's not overtly political, I think all fiction has a political element. If you decide to tell the story from character A's point of view, it has a different politic than if you decide to go with character B's point of view. It's automatically political, the story. So at the beginning, I usually think about why I want to tell the story and is it worth telling? More than me thinking I want to change things. It's about whether, you know, there are a lot of books in the world and whether the book can stand to have another one. You know, is it necessary for it to be on this shelf? And it's both a personal necessity that I really want to find out what I think about the situation. And it's also the physical necessity of it being out in the world. You know, is it useful in any way, or will it communicate something interesting? And then at the end, I normally try and stand back and think, what have you done here? What have you made? What is it? And try and take some personal responsibility for it. And then I look at what it means as a story, I think the end of a book can often be very important as to what the reader takes away. If a book ends on a hopeful note, the reader will take away something very different than if it ends in a dark note of despair. So I often am looking at the ending for a long time, you know. How am I leaving? What is there a bitter taste in the mouth at the end? Or is there a sense that an optimism, that things can get better? I've done both, you know, in the books, usually.
All the novels are political, as you said. Am I right? You're currently working on a book about Brexit?
Yeah.
Can you share your plans with us, how the work goes?
Yeah. At the moment, it's very early stages. So I had this idea that I wanted to set a book that was, you know, a family wake up the morning after the Brexit vote, the morning after the referendum, which was a shock and a kind of moment of deep inner questioning for me when that vote happened. What did it mean what did it mean about the country that we were living in? What does it mean that the vote went that way? You know, what does it mean about the island, the element of Britain, the fact that it's an island? What does that mean personally to how you might feel when you walk down the street? So I had this idea, which is still in progress, still in flux, about a family who wake up the morning after. They are, it's a GP and his wife, who's an accountant. They're both Indian, they're both old, in their 70s. They've got children who are younger. And they wake up and someone has tried to kill them and they don't know who it is. And they don't know if it's linked to Brexit or not. They don't know if it's a hate crime. And they live in a little village where they're loved and they love everyone in the village. They're the village GP, the village doctor. And it's about that being the inciting incident. That's the beginning. And then the book then is an excavation of their relationship to that village, and things start happening. Strange things start happening in the village. But it won't be called The Village this time. It'll be called something else.
But you're writing about pretty current events and about pretty fresh trauma. Perhaps this position has too much disadvantages because people need you as a writer, as a novelist, and people as your readers. Perhaps we need some more time to rethink, is this trauma not too fresh to write a book about that?
Yeah. Well, Brexit is changing all the time. Every day there's a new take on Britain's relationship to the exit treaty, how it's happening. New, fresh infractions are taking place every day. So you're right. Ultimately, will Brexit be anything other than the referendum vote would be a trigger for the story? The story's not about Brexit probably, but it's about the fact that that vote took place and it had that outcome. And that seems to me to be a good beginning for a story and a good beginning for looking at an attempted murder in a village. So I'm quite interested in genre elements as well as literary. You know, the books tend to be on the literary side, but I'm more and more interested in genre elements that might come from thriller or mystery or detective when placed within a literary setting. So fusing the two together. So that's what I'm thinking about. But the Brexit vote, just the fact that the vote took place, is an interesting jumping off point to start a book.
Well, I'll think about that. And I was looking through the Goodreads reviews on your books, and actually I understood perhaps I was not too good at this, but I found only positive ones. All this gorgeous book, beautiful, fascinating, worth reading, and all the things. Are you getting some negative feedback? And if yes, how are you dealing with that? I'm asking that because mostly people who will be watching or reading this interview will be people connected to the big book sphere in Ukraine and to the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you. That's very kind. And I have had good reviews. It's always nerve-wracking to put yourself out there. And the newspaper reviews in the UK have also been good in all the broadsheets and the tabloids. And so that's a big relief when that happens, because I try not to let reviews affect me. But of course, you want to feel heard, to feel seen. You know, sometimes there are negative, there'll be a negative line in a review, like a line or two, where they say something about, I don't know, using too many similes, using too many metaphors, something like that, too many poetic attempts, something semi-flippant like that. And I always think that that's interesting, but it helps, of course, if it's in a review that is 90% positive. Then it's very easy to accept and think about, yeah, maybe they're right, if there's a little bit of negativity. On Goodreads, I'm actually quite interested in Goodreads because it's during COVID, I haven't had any reader contact. I've barely seen the book in a shop. I've been to, especially to bookshops now to see it, because for so many months I didn't see it in the bookshops. And so to have any reader feedback is quite exciting for me. So Goodreads is that there are actual readers out there who are reading it and having thoughts and reading it in the way that it was required. The book's not written for newspaper reviewers, it's written for public, for people who read the way I do. I'm a reader who picks up a book, and has all kinds of criteria when I read it, and I'm either drawn into it or I'm not. So I've been really pleased that Goodreads has been so positive, yeah. I mean, there are some negative reviews tucked away there in Goodreads, and you do go, but then you think, okay, maybe you have a point. I'm open to it, I don't feel a sense of disgust if I realize someone didn't like the book. I'm interested in the fact that they did read it, finish it, engage with it.
And you touched this current aspect of our reality. How is it promoting the book, promoting your current novel, you people during the pandemic? How everything's changed. So you're, as I understand, you're in the middle of your campaign now.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting used to Zoom. I mean, it's different. It's a little bit underwhelming at times. I miss real festivals. I see that as a perk of the job. I often see it as my reward for writing, that I get, and being published, that I get to go to a festival and meet readers and go and see other writers speak and, socialize in that way, be part of the debate, the dialogue out there in the world. But I've been having that on Zoom. I've done a lot of radio in the UK, and that was fun, because that's basically the same. That's the same as it would be, if you were outside of our current reality. I feel like it's been in the UK, the book community has been very supportive. So it got reviewed at one point, the pages were so full of COVID in all the newspapers. No one wanted to, including myself, read about anything else. And I thought I won't get reviewed. And that would be, also make me feel like the book was invisible. And that didn't happen. And so I'm very happy about that it got its column inches, and that Goodreads reviews have turned up, and that the book has been available. The fact that digital books are available also meant that everyone was reading. And so I feel I've adapted to the situation a bit now, especially because I've seen it in my local bookshop. That helped. And I go in there to look at it sometimes to remind me that the book is there in the world and it doesn't just exist on Zoom.
Okay. Thank you, Nikita. Thank you for your question. But I have only one. It's pretty specific question, which is, I think, more interesting for me, not for you or our viewers, but me as a journalist. I'm always having this feeling that person you're talking to is expecting to hear some question and is never hearing some questions from the journalism. What is this thing? What is this question you'd like to answer, but you're never hearing it?
Oh, wow. That takes me back to when I was a documentary maker. I don't know if there's, I don't think there is a question that you're trying to answer. You have a question, as an author, you have a question, which is, did the world communicate itself to you, or were you carried along by the story? But I feel that that's a question from me to you, rather than the other way around, you know, which is actually answered, I think, by the interview we've had. So the question is, you know, you're always making it up as an author. You're always creating, it's a fiction, even if you start with reality, as I did, and I mix together characters I've met in order to create a new character. The question is always, does that character, you know, really have legs and arms and, you know, eyes and teeth, and do they feel real, you know? And I guess that's the question that I would have.
Nikita, thank you so much. It was amazing to hear you and to have this talk to you.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you so much.
Sad but true, we're not able to meet and to do this interview in person because of the borders and COVID situation, but I hope we'll meet in Ukraine and talk a little bit more later. So
I would love that.
Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.